Time to Die is the 25th official film in the James Bond series, and marks the 5th and final time that Daniel Craig will be playing the iconic spy. It's directed by Cary Joji Fukunaga and also stars Léa Seydoux, Ramy Malek, Ralph Fiennes, Christophe Waltz, Lashana Lynch, and Ana de Armas. The story follows James Bond, who, while living in retirement in Jamaica, is asked by old friend Felix Leiter for help in tracking down a missing scientist. The trail leads Bond to a mysterious villain armed with dangerous new technology. So, I'm just going to say right now that I'm not going to be giving any spoilers at this point in the review. Once I get to that point, I will let you know. I'm sure there's other people that, like me, hadn't seen the film yet. I only saw it recently, so I will let you know when I get into the spoiler section of this review. To start off, this was one of the first major films that was delayed back in spring of 2020. And so it kind of, it got delayed, and then it seemed like it was going to come out, and then it got delayed again, and over time it started to feel like a movie that no one was ever going to get to see, just because it had taken so long. We'd seen the trailers so long ago. They would put out a new trailer. It was largely the same footage, which is good. They didn't give away too much, I don't think, in those trailers. But it kind of started to feel that it was the movie that we all were wanting to see and couldn't. So now that it's finally out, it's really exciting to be able to see it, and then also to be able to talk about it and talk about it with other people. I will say that I am a fan of the James Bond films. I've seen all of them, some of them multiple times. I've done quite a bit of reading about the series. I definitely don't have the encyclopedic knowledge that some people I've seen on YouTube have, but I am a fan, and I was looking forward to this movie. I did have my expectations not set too highly. I know I made that mistake going into Spectre back when it came out in 2015. I had been a huge fan of Skyfall, and knowing that it was the same cast and same director all coming back for Spectre, I had been extremely excited for that one. And that one had kind of left me a little bit disappointed afterwards. I have watched it a couple times since. It hasn't really grown on me, so knowing that they were going to do another one was exciting, because I thought that could salvage it rather than leaving it as Spectre as Daniel Craig's final movie. But I was careful not to get my anticipation too high. With that being said, I have to say that I absolutely loved it. I thought it was a great movie, a great James Bond movie, and a really fitting end to Daniel Craig's tenure in the role. I thought it was beautifully shot. I thought the lighting in certain scenes was just spectacular. Just a really, really great looking movie, one that really has a good understanding of how a grand scale epic action movie should look, and it really presented that all so well. In terms of the action, I thought the gunfights and the large set piece action scenes and the stunts were all really well done. The amount of gunplay that James Bond is involved in is a lot more than is typical for the series, I think. It almost was making me think of like Tomorrow Never Dies or something like that, although that's more in the spraying machine gun fire style of gunfighting, and this was much more very much in the way that Daniel Craig's James Bond is very calm, to the point, very much how he behaves in large-scale gunfights as well. Very well shot. It at times actually made me think of there's the gunfight in the gypsy camp back in From Russia with Love. That style of very calm, moving through the action type of style of fighting. There's a scene that was heavily featured in all of the trailers, I think, of the Aston Martin DB5 in a pretty major action scene, and I was really looking forward to seeing that full scene, and it did not disappoint whatsoever. I think it's definitely the most action we've ever seen the DB5 involved in. It utilizes the machine guns behind the headlights very well. There's a couple of other gadgets that show up that we haven't seen before, and it was all just filmed so well. In that scene, as well as in several other scenes, the film really utilizes the bird's eye view shots, just to get a full view of the action playing out just from directly above. And I thought that looked great. That scene and tied with the music and everything, it really did not disappoint. There's also a scene in Norway, I believe, in a very foggy, misty forest, which I think it was maybe in the second trailer we got to see a little bit more of that, and that scene as well. Leading up to that, there's an off-road car chase, which normally you don't really associate with most action movies, but I'm not sure if we've ever seen that in the James Bond series, but just a Bond being pursued by a group of SUVs and motorcycles through all kinds of rocky terrain and rivers, and all culminating in this tense gunfight amongst this very atmospherically filmed forest scene. And I think that scene looked great and really stood out. I mean, there's so many scenes and shots that really stand out that you can pick out and say that's going to be a classic moment, or that is going to be. And I think this movie is full of them. I mean, the movie is closing in at nearly 3 hours, so there is a lot of time and room for great moments, and they do not skimp on those whatsoever. Daniel Craig's performance in the film was great. And just going back to Spectre again, if you put those two performances side by side, I think you can really see the enthusiasm and love he has for this character really return in No Time to Die. I'm not sure if it's just because of the remarks that he made after having made Spectre, or if it is actually in the performance. I don't know if I'm just reading into it, but it seemed at that point that he was maybe a little bit bored with the character and tired of having to play him, and that seemed to come across in that movie. And that was probably also another reason why I had a little bit of trepidation going into No Time to Die. I was hoping that he would go out on a note that seemed like he liked the character, he liked the direction of this movie, and I think that shows that he did go out on a high note. In between, of course, he's played very different characters in films such as Logan Lucky or Knives Out, and those ones you really got a sense that he was having fun playing that character. And then when you compare that to Spectre, you could tell that there was a different energy going into those other roles. And I think he kind of brought some of that back to Bond in No Time to Die. And that was really nice to see. Just to talk a bit more about the rest of the cast, Léa Seydoux is back as Madeleine Swann from Spectre, and I really found myself liking her character and her performance a lot more in this film in comparison to Spectre. Spectre ends with her and Bond kind of riding off into the sunset, and Bond seeming to retire from MI6, and it didn't really feel right to me. It didn't really make sense why he would leave MI6 for her. Something about that just didn't sit right with me. But in this film, there's a much better effort, I think, at showing their relationship, and that they do have a really strong connection, and that they seem to need each other, actually. I think that was very well presented here. And her performance in several scenes, very emotional, very well played, and was really impressive, I think, in terms of her performance. The rest of the usual Bond regulars are back. M and Q and Moneypenny and Tanner, they're all back. They're not used quite as much as they were in Spectre, which I think is good. I think that it feels more in line with how the series has typically treated those characters. Although it is still odd to me that after Moneypenny's role in Skyfall, that she has just ended up being the secretary role that Moneypenny always traditionally was in the older films, when she was seen as much more of in-on-the-action field agent in Skyfall. But still, I think they're all used very well. Lashana Lynch plays a very highly publicized new 007. As Bond has gone into retirement, his number, 007, has been given to a new agent, played by Lashana Lynch. And that is a very big part of her character, the fact that she has that number. And I think her performance is good. I think she has that cockiness of a newer agent that Daniel Craig's Bond had back in Casino Royale, and I think that's an interesting parallel that they were showing, that this is how they start off and then it can change over time. The overuse of making such a big deal out of the 007 number seemed a little strange to me, just because characters in the movie haven't been watching James Bond 007 movies for the last 60 years. And yet somehow that number is still very important in the universe, which I don't know if I totally understand, but that's fine. I think all in all, her character is not used as much as it seemed to be in the hype for the movie. It seemed like she was maybe going to play a larger role in the plot, and it's not as much as it initially might have seemed it would. Jeffrey Wright is back as Felix Leiter. Haven't seen him since the first two of Daniel Craig's films, and it's nice to see him back. He also does not have a huge part in the movie, but I think he and Daniel Craig have great chemistry, and their scenes together are very well done. You can tell that they enjoy being around each other, and even if Bond is not initially so receptive to the request that Felix brings to him, their dialogue and their banter back and forth is pretty entertaining. Christophe Waltz is back playing Blofeld after having initially played the character in Spectre, and I think he's very well used here. I know so much was made of the fact that was he or wasn't he Blofeld in the lead up to Spectre, and now that that is out of the way and that we all know, yes, he is Blofeld, I think the time that he's given here he uses very well. He has a great introductory scene when they're visiting him in prison or an institution of some kind where he's being held, and the scene where he is revealed is really played for maximum suspense, and I think that worked very well. Ramy Malek plays the main villain of the film, Safin, and I think his whole character is very much in the tradition of those older style Bond villains, where they've got the huge lair where their big plot is kind of being formed. They have hundreds of guards and workers to carry out their every whim. He also has some sort of skin condition or something kind of that's also in that some sort of unusual look for the villains, and he just in general I think always comes across as a fairly creepy or menacing figure in his films, and he brings that here. He isn't the strongest character in the movie. Might actually be my least favorite part of the movie, his whole character. The focus is definitely on Bond in the story, and Bond and Madeline actually, and Safin is more of a side character for the most part. But I think he has the right presence for the scenes that he's in. Ana de Armas is in the film as well in one really fantastic scene, and it's kind of hard to believe seeing her and what she all does in here, that she is the same character who is the humble, soft-spoken nurse in Knives Out. It's really great seeing her and Daniel Craig back together again, and I hope that they have the opportunity to make more films together in future. I think they have a really great chemistry, and she has such a lighthearted personality in this movie that really has a nice sense of humor, and it was I think pretty well needed at that point in the movie, and she's kind of a breath of fresh air who just kind of pops in and out, and there's a reason I think that a lot of people were talking about her performance in this movie. Another thing I loved about this movie is that it is absolutely filled with callbacks to previous Bond films, whether Daniel Craig's films or just even the older ones, and they were all worked into the plot so well. They were integrated so that it wasn't like the whole movie had to stop for everyone to go, do you remember this? When you compare it to something like a lot of the Marvel movies, it seems like there's a really strong effort to be like, do you remember Captain America? Do you remember Tony Stark? And we do. We get it. We know what we're watching. And this film doesn't do that. If you don't get the references, you won't even notice that there was a reference necessarily. A lot of it is in the way something is filmed, or just the choice of shots, or just certain visuals. Even if you can't place it right in the moment, at least for myself, as I was thinking about it, it was like, oh yeah, that's kind of like that shot from On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Oh, that's kind of like in Thunderball. You know, different things that, whether visual or also musical callbacks, there are different times when certain themes, you all of a sudden notice them slowly coming in the background. And that was really nice to see and hear, that if you get the references, great. If you don't, it's not going to affect your viewing whatsoever. One thing I also really appreciated is that in this film, Bond is not the womanizer that we have seen for movie after movie. That has always been my least favorite part of the character. I don't think it adds anything. If anything, it makes me dislike the character, just because I don't agree with that type of lifestyle, and I think that it doesn't reflect well on an otherwise heroic character. And so if that is the direction they're planning to take, I don't know if that's what they're planning to do, but as they continue to make the movies, if they can phase that out, that is more than fine with me. I know some people have complained that, oh, they're changing Bond too much, they're trying to make him modernized. If that's a symbol of modernizing Bond, then in that sense, I am all for it. I think that that the character is vastly improved by eliminating that. So, just all in all, I would highly, highly recommend the movie. If you're familiar with the previous Daniel Craig movies, it's never really happened this way that the Bond films have tied together so closely as they have in these past 5. So if you're familiar with those, you'll definitely enjoy it more. I think you can still go into this one without having seen them, and it's still a great movie regardless. But just to enjoy it as much as possible and to really understand the whole plot, it would probably benefit to watch the preceding 4 movies as well. Just a little warning, we're going to get into spoilers now, and they will be starting now. One thing that was quite unusual was the opening scene of the film doesn't feature Bond at all. Typically, we're all used to seeing it starting, Bond's finishing a mission or in the middle of a mission, and it'll be some action set piece, which comes shortly thereafter, but it really is the backstory of Madeleine Swann. It really goes back to a story that was told by her inspector, and how man came to her house when she was a child looking to kill her father, and this is how that plays out, and shows Safin coming to their house and ending up murdering her mother, and eventually saving Madeleine's life when she runs out onto a frozen lake. One facet of the Daniel Craig series of Bond movies is that everyone close to him seems to die at some point, and that happens here with the death of Felix Leiter. And I think that scene plays out quite well. It almost makes you wish that Felix could have gotten to be in the movie a little bit more before that, but it still is an emotional scene. And there too, from what I was mentioning earlier about the callbacks to previous films, that shot of Felix drifting away from Bond in the water as they're trapped inside the ship that's sinking, very reminiscent of Vesper's death back in Casino Royale. I think that the scene was appropriately emotional. You really got the sense in this movie that there had to have been some stories we hadn't seen where they grew closer between Quantum of Solace and No Time to Die. Another one of those visual references is during that scene in the forest in Norway. There's a character, Logan Ash, who was responsible for Felix's death, and he ends up trapped with the vehicle that he's fallen out of teetering above him, and at the end of the scene, Bond ends up kicking the car down on top of him, and very similar to in For Your Eyes Only, possibly one of the most iconic moments from the Roger Moore series films, when he kicks a car off a cliff that is teetering on the brink, and just the tie between those was very strong. And just, at least in the Roger Moore films, you didn't get the sense that Bond was always that brutal of a character, but he can be, and of course we know that much more from the Daniel Craig series, but it was just another interesting tie-in where they pay tribute to what's come before. One major plot thread from the film is the fact that, for the first time ever, James Bond has a child in this film, a daughter, named Mathilde. And that fact really plays into the ending of the movie, which is the biggest spoiler of them all, the fact that James Bond dies. And that is also a first for the series. And I've looked at lots of people's reviews and reactions to the film, and amongst a lot of James Bond fans, that was not a popular decision to kill him off. But I think, for me, it really worked well, and it was kind of the perfect ending for not only this movie, but for this saga that they have built over the last 15 years. There's a recurring theme throughout all of them of regrets and of loneliness for Bond. And upon learning about his child and reconnecting with Madeline after having been separated for 5 years, Bond has a reason to live and a reason to not be in this self-imposed isolation. But I guess I hadn't really talked about the plot, the villain's plot, being these nanobots that can be used to target certain victims to kill off. And Bond is infected by the villain with a particular formulation of these nanobots that will only kill Madeline and Mathilde if he ever touches them. So, when faced with that, and faced with the prospect of never being able to touch his family again, Bond decides to stay on the island that is going to be hit with missiles shortly to eliminate all of the nanobot research and the whole facility. And I know there have been arguments, he could have got off, maybe they could have got this out of his bloodstream. But I think for what he was faced with at the time, and also just keeping in mind in real life, Daniel Craig was done with this series, and he wanted to make sure that he wouldn't be coming back. That is also, you can't ever forget that when you're watching it, that this is what he was wanting. But also for the character, that knowing that he won't be able to spend the rest of his life with his family, that he decides to just stay there and to go down with the island. I think it was a very emotional ending. I have to admit I was kind of predicting it ever since the second scene when he and Madeline are driving along the road, winding along the cliffs on the way to Matera, and the song from On Her Majesty's Secret Service, "We Have All the Time in the World," slowly comes in. I knew they weren't going to kill either one of them right then, but I thought, okay, Daniel Craig's not coming back. They might be going for a tragic ending here. And whereas On Her Majesty's Secret Service ends with Bond's wife dying, I don't think they would have wanted to end it with just her dying and him being left alone. I thought they would kill them together. But when they revealed the daughter angle, I was starting to expect, okay, if they're going to do anything in terms of a tragic ending, they're going to kill Bond and have Madeline and Mathilde survive, which is what happened in the end. But as we were getting towards the end of the movie, just with everything that had kind of built towards it and kind of my renewed liking of Daniel Craig's Bond, I started to think I'm not really ready for that to happen yet. And I had a brief moment of hope when Bond finds Mathilde's stuffed rabbit laying on the floor, and he picks it up, and whatever it was, whether just the choice of shots or the expression in his face, I did have hope that he was going to make it out. But unfortunately, that is not what happens. It was a pretty tough ending to the movie, just to watch and to realize that this character you've been watching is gone, and we won't be seeing him again, which I knew ahead of time, but it still really affected me. And I think you could only do this ending with Daniel Craig's Bond. None of the others, whether you're talking Sean Connery, Roger Moore, any of them, definitely not Pierce Brosnan, none of them had that emotional connection to the audience, I don't think. They were the ambassador or the emblem of these escapist films, but they didn't have the relatability or the as I was saying, the emotional connection to the audience that Daniel Craig has. So if they were ever going to do a tragic end to a Bond actor's tenure, this was the one to do it in. And really the whole Daniel Craig series, starting from the origin story to just connecting all the films together, it was really a kind of an experiment. It hadn't been done before in the I guess it would have been 44 years previously, where all of those things were being done for the first time. And this is also another first, and I think it was a good choice on their part. I'm thinking they likely won't do it again. I think it could only happen now. I just think that that theme of sacrifice was a really good ending for that character after seeing where he came from and the different low points he was at, that he decides to make this choice and this sacrifice for his family. But at the very end of the credits, as they always do, it says James Bond will return. So whoever that is, or whatever direction they take it with, they are planning to make more. It'll, as far as I can guess, I'm thinking it'll probably take a while. These films seem to take quite a while to get made these days, especially in comparison to the earlier films. They were making one every 2 years. I don't think they're ever going to get back to that. But he will be back in some form. If I had any complaints whatsoever with the movie, it would be largely with Safin, as I mentioned earlier, and the fact that he seems to really have no motivation for what he's doing. There's never a great end game laid out for why he's wanting to do this, who he's targeting, which makes me almost wonder if there was something cut from it, whether it was a similarity to a different series of films that Big Bad's plan for saving the planet's resources, or whatever it was. I don't know what it could have been, but it seems that something must have been missing. These scripts are worked on for a long time. I would think the motivation of the bad guy would be a pretty major thing. But as far as that would be the one thing I would have to really complain about. But it didn't affect the outcome or the emotion of the story. And the story, in every other sense, is complete. So as I said earlier, I really highly recommend the film. I think it was very well acted, a great cast they put together for it, and just all in all, just a thrilling, epic conclusion to the Daniel Craig era of James Bond, and I hope all of you enjoyed it as well. So, with that, I hope you'll all check back to my channel to see more reviews coming shortly, and for Hildebrand Productions, adios for now.